Hi, I'm Brett Becker.
And I'm Catherine Mooney from University College Dublin.
We'd really wish that we could be in Toronto with everybody, but since the only people in Toronto are the ones that live there, we're coming to you from the west of Ireland.
Sense of belonging is a personal belief that one is an accepted member of an academic community whose presence and contributions are valued. However, sense of belonging can be impacted by many factors. It has also been shown to be associated with student motivation, persistence, and other attributes. We have been tracking the sense of belonging of our undergraduate students over the last 3 years. Since 2017, 130 students have completed our survey. The survey questions were adapted from the Math Sense of Belonging scale, and they included 18 positively framed questions, for example, I feel accepted, I feel respected, and 12 negatively framed questions, for example, I feel excluded, I feel disregarded. All of these questions were preceded by when I am in a computer science setting. We calculated the sense of belonging score, or the belongingness, by taking the sum of the negatively framed questions from the sum of the positively framed questions.
In addition to the questions that we adapted from the Math Sense of Belonging scale, we also asked additional questions such as what extracurricular activities students had taken part in, how much students interact, in their own opinion, with other computing students socially, how much students enjoy problem solving, how confident students are in their mathematics abilities, and how much experience with computing topics they had prior to university. In our pre-COVID 2017 to 2019 surveys, we found that generally students self-identifying as women and minorities have had a lower sense of belonging compared to men and non-minorities. However, intersectionality complicates this.
In our surveys, we asked students what gender they identified with. Additionally, we asked students if they identified as being part of a minority in the School of Computer Science or not. We found that students who identified as being a woman but not being part of a minority had a similar sense of belonging to men. However, students who identified as being a woman and belonging to part of a minority had a much lower sense of belonging.
In the summer of 2020, we investigated what is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing shift to virtual delivery on the sense of belonging of our undergraduate computing students that we were already studying. We surveyed students in August 2020 and refer to this as the post-COVID set. It is post-COVID onset, but we call it the post-COVID set. We had 68 responses to this survey. Students had moved from studying remotely from March 12, 2020, and had been under various stages of lockdown for about 6 months.
Almost 200 students have completed our surveys. 130 students completed the survey prior to the onset of COVID-19, and 68 students completed the survey post-onset of COVID-19. These students were fairly evenly spread from year 1 to year 4. 62 of the students identified as being a woman, and 45 of these identified as belonging to part of a minority. 136 students identified as men, and 33 of these identified as belonging to part of a minority. If students identified as belonging to part of a minority, we gave them the option to self-describe what minority they believed that they belonged to. We observed that not all women identify as being part of a minority. Some women identify as being part of a minority, but not because they are women. Some identify as being part of a minority, only because they are a woman. And some women identify as being part of a minority because they are women in addition to other reasons, including race, ethnicity, nationality, age, socioeconomic factors, LGBTQIA, and others.
This Venn diagram depicts the intersectionalities that we observed. For instance, 20 women did not identify as being part of a minority. 22 women identified as being part of a minority only because they're women. 8 women identified as being part of a minority because they're women, but also because of race, ethnicity, or nationality. 18 men identified as being part of a minority because of race, ethnicity, or nationality, and or LGBTQIA, and additionally, 2 of them also gave other reasons. 12 men identified as being part of a minority only for other self-described reasons. These other reasons included things like being a mature student, having a disability, and socioeconomic backgrounds. This histogram and this box plot show the distributions of belongingness scores broken down by the time that the surveys were completed, pre-COVID-19 onset and post-COVID-19 onset. We see that the distributions are fairly similar, despite the fact that we have fewer students responding to the survey post-COVID-19 onset. There is no statistically significant difference between the two distributions, pre and post-COVID-19 onset. In this and the following graphs, greater numeric belongingness scores correspond to a better sense of belonging.
Here we have box plots showing the belongingness scores from pre and post COVID-19 onset, broken down by whether students do or do not identify as being part of a minority in Figure A. So here we can see that there was a statistically significant drop in the sense of belonging of students who do not identify as being part of a minority. And in Figure B, where we have broken down the belongingness scores by whether students identified as a man or a woman, we can see that there was a statistically significant drop in the sense of belonging of students who identified as men. Interestingly, we can see in Figure A that there was a slight increase in the sense of belonging of students who identified as a minority, and in Figure B, similarly, a slight increase in the sense of belonging of students identifying as women.
Here we have two figures demonstrating the intersectionality of gender and self-identified minority status. In plot A, we see that there's a not significant yet interesting increase in the sense of belonging of students identifying as women who also self-identified as being part of a minority. In plot B, we see that there's a statistically significant drop in the sense of belonging of students who identify as men and who did not identify as being part of a minority. This figure shows an overview of all of our surveys and all of our studies, both pre-COVID-19 onset and post-COVID-19 onset. It's important to point out that our students were surveyed over a number of discrete time points, so that these curves are not necessarily as smooth as they appear here. The two lines at the top show students who self-identified as non-minorities, both men and women. We see that post-COVID-19, they experienced a rather marked decrease in sense of belonging. Students self-identifying as men and also self-identifying as minorities experienced a relatively stable sense of belonging both pre and post-COVID-19 onset. The result that we perhaps found most surprising was the rather large increase in the sense of belonging of students self-identifying as women who also self-identified as being part of a minority, although we do have to point out that this is not a statistically significant difference. Conclusions that we can make directly from our observations in this study include the fact that COVID-19 seems to have had a larger impact on the sense of belonging of all of our students in the space of only a few months since the onset of COVID-19 than we otherwise observed over the 2 prior years. Additionally, men and women who do not identify as being part of any minority appear to have had similar downward shifts in their senses of belonging. Although in our results only men showed a statistically significant decrease, the lack of a significant difference for women is likely due to sample size. Women who do identify as being part of a minority had a large increase in sense of belonging post-COVID-19, although this was also not statistically significant. Again, this could be because we have many fewer women responding to our surveys due to having fewer women in general in our undergraduate students. Finally, men who do not identify as being part of any minority saw the largest statistically significant drop in belongingness since the onset of COVID-19.
Thank you for watching our presentation. We're looking forward to the question and answer session. We feel that this work has probably raised more questions than it has answered. For example, we need to explore more why the sense of belonging of our students that identified as women and also as part of a minority actually increased post onset of COVID-19 compared to the students who did not identify as part of a minority, who saw a large decrease in their sense of belonging. So having discussed this, we've come up with 2 potential reasons for this, but we don't have the evidence to support these reasons yet, so they definitely need to be explored further. But we're looking forward to discussing these ideas in more detail with you during the question and answer session.